Revolutions, something that we've heard all throughout history, all throughout the world, and something we're probably very familiar with today's society. Um, so I thought we'd start off with a quick little activity. So I'm going to ask you what a revolution is. So if everyone can go onto this link, so thepolev.com/AthenaS216, or you can use your phone and you can text this code to 37607. And I'll share my screen here with you too. So I don't know if you guys have done this before, but this is it's a poll word cloud kind of thing. So if you could type in one word, you can type however many words you want, but it's one word at a time. Anything that you can think about that relates to a revolution. So it can be a name of a revolution or like a word associated with revolution, anything, and they will all appear here. Perfect. And we'll go through all of that at the end. And even if you see a word on the screen, you can type it. So like the more it shows up, the bigger it'll get. So I see ideology, failure, state, machinery, changing, keep it coming, masses. Uprising, ideology, overthrow. That's a good one. Overthrowing. Nice. I'll give you about 2 more minutes to think of words. Cool. And I think that is good. I'm going to lock that. We're going to take a look at these words. So right smack in the middle is overthrow, which I guess it's very popular. That is true. You do have to overthrow a political regime or government for a revolution. So everything is true here. So overthrowing, yes. Government, fighting, ideology. I'm going to press next to see if I can. I cannot. Yeah, so government, back. These are one words, so some of these don't really make sense. But state, support, violent, machinery, people, class. That's a good one. Masses, corruption, ideology. Yeah, those are all correct. So you guys already have a really good sense of what a revolution is. So let's take a look at what I said a revolution was, or what Columbia University said. So according to Columbia University, a revolution refers to a movement, often violent, to overthrow an old regime and effect complete change in the fundamental institutions of society. So that's a lot to unpack. That's a huge definition. So over the course of these slides, we're going to kind of break that down a bit. So for me, I'm the kind of person who I really like pop culture. So everything I do outside of teaching is um, related to pop culture. Like I listen to musicals, I watch a lot of movies. So when I think of revolution, the first thing that comes to my head is the Hunger Games. So like thumbs up if you know what the Hunger Games is. I'm sure you've all kind of heard of it if you haven't watched it or read it. So when I think of revolutions, I think of yeah, basically what happened in the Hunger Games. So I'm going to play this little summary. It says a summary of all the Hunger Games movies. It's actually 2 and a bit. They don't summarize the third one, but I'll fill you in on that. So if you haven't watched or read the Hunger Games, we're going to look at this and then kind of connect all those everything that we're going to talk about after this. We're going to kind of relate it back to Hunger Games. So while you're watching this, see if there's symbols or hints of what you think a revolution is.
Like much of the world, you're probably thinking about seeing The Hunger Games Mockingjay Part 1. But what if you don't remember all the crazy stuff that happened in the first 2 Hunger Games movies? Or what if you didn't even see them in the first place? Don't worry. We've got you more covered than PETA in a pile of moss. The first Hunger Games movie reveals a dystopian future America called Pan Am. We learn that there was a war many years ago, after which the country was divided into 12 districts, most of which are super poor, and one capital, which is super rich. Every year, the capital summons 2 children from each district to fight in the Hunger Games, a days-long televised battle to the death. Enter Katniss Everdeen. She lives in District 12 with her sister and her widowed mother. She has a crush on a hot guy named Gale. She has a complicated relationship with a whiny kid named PETA. Oh, and she also has this pin with a Mockingjay on it. That's going to be important later. Her sister gets picked for the Hunger Games, so Katniss breaks tradition and volunteers to go instead.
I volunteer as tribute!
The other tribute is PETA, and the 2 of them take a train to the Capitol, where they hang out with a former Hunger Games winner and current alcoholic named Haymitch, and with an uptight chaperone named Effie. PETA tells a TV host named Caesar that he's in love with Katniss, and she reluctantly pretends to feel the same way so viewers will like them more. And then, it's time for the games. After days of bloodshed and improbable camouflage, PETA and Katniss are the only kids left. But instead of killing each other, they threaten to commit joint suicide, so the people in charge make them the first duel winners. Snow, the president of Pan Am, is not happy about this. But he sucks. In Catching Fire, we find out Katniss and PETA really things up for the Capitol. The districts are getting restless now that they've seen somebody break the rules. The fake lovers go on a tour of Pan Am, and Snow forces them to pretend they wrecked the games for love, not defiance. But no one's buying it, and District 12's traditional 3-finger salute becomes a symbol of rebellion. Meanwhile, Katniss is actually starting to catch feelings for PETA, and the new guy in charge of the games, Plutarch Heavensbee, says he has it out for Katniss.
I agree she should die, but in the right way.
Crazily enough, that year's Hunger Games are a reunion special with winners from past years fighting each other. Katniss and PETA are among the competitors, and in the games they team up with a bunch of people, but the ones you need to remember are a young hothead named Finnick and an old tech expert named Beetee. Together, they all hack the arena and blow it up. Hooray! Katniss gets rescued, and the final moments of the movie are kind of a good news, bad news situation. The good news is there's a nationwide rebellion, Plutarch was secretly part of it, and Katniss and her Mockingjay pin are its symbols. The bad news is District 12 was destroyed. Womp womp. And now you're ready to see Mockingjay Part 1, in which everybody prepares for war and PETA becomes a prisoner slash poster child slash suit model for President Snow. Aw, look at that handsome little guy.
Cool. So, all right. So that's the Hunger Games. And spoiler alert, if you didn't watch the third movie, I'm going to tell you now. So cover your ears if you don't want to listen. So in the third one, basically Katniss finds this lost district, District 13, and they basically start a revolution. They go into the Capitol and they want to overthrow their government, so President Snow, to replace it with President Coin, which is the District 13 president. And in the end, Katniss ends up killing President Coin, and also President Snow ends up dead anyways. So that's the entire change of the system. So none of them are president, and they replace it with a new system. Anyways, let's talk about 6 characteristics of a revolution. So based off what we just saw, the first characteristic is an alteration or change of the basic values and myths of society. So connecting back to the Hunger Games, so the basic myths of society here would be basically the Hunger Games. So sending off 2 kids in each district to fight to the death. That is the basic value that they've known their entire lives. So number 2 is an alteration of the social structure. So that has triangles. So triangles is in brackets. I think you guys talked about this. So triangles would be, so right now the triangle is a normal triangle, and at the top would be the king or the president or whatever. And then in the middle of the triangle, it gets a bit bigger, and that is where the nobles are, so the richest people. And at the bottom, the biggest population is the normal people and the peasants. And for a revolution, they usually want a flipped triangle, which is the people, most of the people on top, telling the government what they want in the changes. So in the Hunger Games, it would be the people, or the biggest population would be in the district. So all the peasants and the poor people, whereas the capital is the 1% who's the richest. They don't have to participate in the Hunger Games, all that jazz. And yeah, so that's what they're trying to change. And the third characteristic is an elimination of previous political institutions and its replacement by another. So that is basically Katniss and the rebels going to kill President Snow and replace that with another system. So number 4 is a change in structure of leadership. So basically the same thing. They want to take down the government and replace it with another. An illegal transfer of leadership. So it's not something they plan, like they don't vote for another president. It's like they take them down, they overthrow the government so that someone else can be a leader. And then there's presence and dominance of violence leading to the collapse of a regime. So usually there's a war of some sort, protests. Yeah. So 6 characteristics. Yeah.
Was this an order?
Sorry?
Like, so are these characteristics, do you say they happen in that order, or is it just?
No. These are just the 6 characteristics. Yeah.
Okay.
So no order, but everything here should happen, or most of things happen in a revolution. Yeah. All right. So great revolutions in history. So I put a few pictures. So the first one is the French Revolution, which is the picture down here. Started in 1789. Their goals were liberation, fraternity, and equality. And the result was a fall of monarchy and birth of the Democratic Republic. And then we have the American Revolution, which is over here. If anyone watched Hamilton, I watched it like 5 times. But yeah, that's about the American Revolution. Started in 1775, and it was also called the Revolutionary War. And their goal was to gain independence from the British Crown and to be separate from them. Then we have the Chinese Revolution, started in 1911, and that was the overthrow of the dynasty and like having an emperor and the creation of the Republic of China. And then we have the Russian Revolution, which is 1917. Their goals were peace, land, and bread, and they overthrew the Tsar and began the Soviet Union. And now we have some recent revolutions. So just a couple. I didn't take too many. So there is Arab Spring. Started in 2010 and included all these places. And then there is the recent umbrella revolution. My family is from Hong Kong, so this is something that's close to me. This happened in Hong Kong in 2014, and their goals were democracy and equal voting rights among all citizens. Cool. So why do revolutions occur? So the key starting point is when the government finally opens up and allows people to start expressing their displeasure. So before, they didn't really let them do anything, and then they gave them an inch, and they were basically like, I'm not actually happy living in this state of government, so something has to change. It's when the government gives them a tiny crack of freedom, basically. Still, an unhappy citizenry is not enough to cause a revolution. Ultimately, the Great Revolutions resulted from a coming together of two overpowering circumstances. So the first one is a widespread rebellion on the part of the lower classes, especially the peasantry. And then the second one is a massive failure within the state machinery in the face of the crisis. So basically, unhappy people plus violence plus failure of government to crush the revolt and stop it is a revolution. Yes.
I want to say, I think like you need something more too. Like in Hunger Games, they had like Katniss as the symbol and the duck coin as, the one that was gonna replace Snow.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you don't have that leader, then people are not gonna rebel, because then who's gonna control the government after that? There's like no structure to that.
Yeah, definitely. And it does have so many other factors to it, but the first two or the main two that sparked the rebellion or sparked the revolution is basically like people are unhappy, and then there is like a failure to stop the revolution. But within that, there's also stuff like symbols of revolution and like a plan and a revolutionary leader. All that stuff is also important. But yes, I definitely agree. So, steps of a revolution. So I have a bunch of steps, and then I have a video explaining all the steps. So I'm just going to go through this really quickly. So steps of a revolution. So the rich get richer and poor get poorer. Then the ruling class rules ineffectively and incapably. I don't know what I put there. Yeah, and then the groups start to feel that the government is hindering their economic growth. Government tries to reform. People transfer loyalty from government to dissenters, and there's those revolutionary leaders that Dina was talking about. Then there's class hatred steps up. Collapse of regime begins with a political crisis, refusal by citizens to pay taxes and go to work, and that is when the revolution is on. Revolutionaries topple government, counter-revolution attempt. Revolution appears successful. Conflicts begin to appear in revolutionary leaders. Moderate reformers seize power. More radical centers of mobilization spring up. Great changes in the organization and ruling ideology of society. So the rise of the radicals, forced imposition of order by coercive rule, struggles between radicals and moderates allow military to command leadership, and revolution preserved. So basically, I found this video on YouTube of how to start or spark a revolution. So everything we talked about in here. So let's take a look at this video.
So you're an idealist that wants to change the world. You view the world as corrupt and oppressive. It has nothing to do with you drinking, smoking, partying all the time, willingly taking on massive amounts of debt, refusing to pick up a book. No, that has nothing to do with it. It's the system's fault. Your first instinct is to exclaim, if we don't get what we want, we're gonna burn the system down and make a new one. While also screaming stereotypical rhetoric like calling people pigs or white fascist racists, with a healthy amount of profanity sprinkled in between, of course. If you're on the other side, maybe you want to scream from the rooftops, you dirty, no good commies. But before you do that, ask yourself, who's that going to change? Is it going to change the middle-class mom that's just trying to provide for her kids? How about the husband that may not have that much, but is working towards a promotion and has his eyes on a new car? Are you going to change their minds by wanting to burn down everything they've worked for? No, you're merely going to make a fool of yourself. We have to be sneakier, more subtle in our methods of insurrection. So whether you're an idealist or maybe you're in or want to be in the 1% and you want to prevent the plebeian masses from stripping you down, we have to learn how to communicate the changes we want in a way that actually gets through people's thick heads. Sure, you can call people racist or commies all day, but you're never going to get them on your side, and that is where the real power is. Or in other words, we have to learn the art of the revolution. Revolutions are nothing new, they're just a part of human society. Revolutions don't have to be communist revolutions either, as it's associated with today. All a revolution really is a change from whatever the status quo was at the time. That means if the current system is communist, then the revolution could be a capitalist one. If the current system is a crony capitalist one, the revolution could be a communist, socialist, or even a more capitalistic one. Revolutions don't have to be violent either. It can happen right underneath our fingertips. For example, Elon Musk is the main revolutionary of the ideology, more on that later, that humans should be an interplanetary species. No bullets will be fired in this interplanetary revolution, but a revolution it still is. Revolutions come about because humans are always pursuing their own self-interest. Nothing wrong with that. Some of those self-interested humans find success and gain power. That power breeds more power and oftentimes leads to corruption, which leads subsequent humans to become resentful of said humans in power, and boom, revolution. And at the core of it all is the never-ending power struggle between the haves, the have-nots, and the have-a-little-want-mores. The haves are pretty simple. They sit at the top of the hierarchy, have the most resources, and are the smallest in number. Because they're so well off at the top, why on earth would they want things to change? Change threatens their power, so there's no hope in trying to convert them. They're set in their establishment ways, they profit off of the status quo. Because they're at the top, everyone is trying to tear them down and get a piece of their very big pie. So one of their biggest worries is losing everything that they have. The have-nots are also pretty simple. They're by far the largest in number at the very bottom of the hierarchy. For the most part, they resent the haves, the upper class, and view them as simply getting rich off of their aching, tired backs. Whether that's true or not, they also hate the upper class's legal system, their police, their opulence. They're trapped together by poverty, disease, low skills, ignorance, and despair. While the upper class has the power of resources, the only power the lower class has is the power of their sheer numbers. They feel pretty hopeless, and because they have such huge pain points, it's very easy to sway them. With the right leader in place, you can very easily fan the flames of their suffering for your revolution. And because they're already at the lowest of the low, once that flame starts, the only direction they can go is up. And then there's the have a little want some more crowd, also known as the middle class. Stuck right in the middle class are torn between two paths. On one hand, they want to uphold the current system to protect the little wealth that they have, and to hopefully move into the upper class by playing by the rules. On the other hand, they also see the temptation to overthrow the status quo so they can join in on pillaging the rich for some instant gratification. This makes the middle class have sort of a split personality, to revolution or to not revolution. An example of this was perfectly illustrated with the recent stimulus checks. Because they're in a complacent spot, things are going okay, I guess. Most of the middle class are do-nothings. On one hand, they'll preach for social justice, change, equality. They'll take part in the latest social media trends, show support, and make them feel like such a good, noble person. But in reality, they're not going to do much and will typically choose the safe route to make sure they come out on top. And every single revolution can be traced back to these three classes. The haves have the power, the have-nots become resentful of their power, that resentment simmers over time until boom, revolutionaries overthrow the haves. Then there's a period of not necessarily peace, but calmness, until the revolutionaries slowly or quickly in some cases morph into the same system they once condemned. And the revolutionary clock is set right back to where it first started. So is the tragedy of human civilization. But before you get violent and burn the system down, I urge you not to. Let's say you start a revolution, a coup right now, and you take control of the government. If the middle class is still feeling complacent with the current system, if all the have-nots aren't fired up behind you, the people in power you're trying to overthrow will swiftly crush you. Why? Because you didn't have the massive support. You didn't lay the groundwork for a revolution. Kind of like what happened in Seattle's autonomous zone or the recently attempted coup in Venezuela. Revolutions happen before a single shot is ever fired. It happens when all the have-nots agree that yes, we finally had enough. It happens when the majority of the middle class say, I'm not sure how I feel about revolution, but as long as they leave me alone, I'm not gonna fight against it. Or in other words, it happens when your populace is ripe for revolution, much like how bananas get ripe for eating. As we mentioned before in our video on mass psychology, the memorable events of history are the visible effects of the invisible changes of human thought. Treat your revolution like a movie. There's an Act 1 where the stage is set, the problem is presented, the good and bad guys are distinguished. Then comes Act 2 where the tension builds, the pressure turns up, and things slowly crescendo into Act 3. The climax of your revolution along with the aftermath. A lot of these idealists want to jump straight into the climax, but without the foreplay, your revolution will fall flat on its knees. As John Adams wrote, the revolution was effected before the war commenced. The revolution was in the hearts and minds of the people. This radical change in the principles, opinions, sentiments, and affections of the people was the real American Revolution. So that's your real job. Change the public's mind first. Make them feel disgusted and enslaved by the system, but not too enslaved to where they feel they can't do anything about it, and your revolution will take care of itself. If you're a part of the haves in power to prevent revolution, your job is to keep your plebs feeling complacent and submissive. It's as simple as that. Now that our foreplay is done, let's get into the nitty-gritty details of your revolution. All revolutions start with an ideology. An idea that the masses can rally behind against those evil men in charge. Something that can get people to move past their primitive instincts of putting their own well-being before others. Something that ordinary lower and middle class people who are just trying to get by are willing to die for. That's a big ask. That's why all ideologies that have led the revolutions of the past have always been around grand ideas like justice, equality, and freedom. Whether or not those revolutionary leaders actually believed in those things is a different story. The point is, ideologies are what ignite revolutions, and your job is to nurture and infect the ideology of your choosing into as many people as possible. Every ideology has one central idea where everything stems from. The Marxist central idea is that evil lies in the greedy capitalists exploiting the poor old proletariats. The libertarian central idea is that evil lies in big government suffocating poor old individuals. So pick your ideology and spread your gospel. You do this by working in the very system that you despise. This can be done via spreading propaganda, educating the public in schools, on the internet, etc. This also means getting into politics, passing bills, starting nonprofits, protesting, or maybe even donating money to people that can do it for you. All with the goal of slowly getting that drumbeat of revolution rising. One insanely effective tactic you can use is the angry mob. Use some kind of emotional, tragic event to rally up an angry mob that demands change. With that angry mob behind you, you can use them to publicly shame people that disagree with you and make demands. Since the middle class usually looks for the safe way out and the haves are worried about losing what they have, at the hands of an angry mob, they'll easily submit to your demands without putting up a fight. But be wary, go too far and you'll risk building resentment against the crowd, which will eventually backfire. Now you may be saying to yourself, but Jake, this sounds like a lot of work. I want change now. And you're right, it does take a lot of work. Changing the culture of millions of people takes time. But what's the alternative? We already covered how calling people racist or commies doesn't help, except in the context of an angry mob. And overthrowing the system without laying down the groundwork doesn't help either. On top of that, the battle over the minds of the public may not even be won in your lifetime. Depending on where you are in the revolutionary clock, you may not even live to see the day where your revolution happens. So you may be wondering what the purpose of all this is, which is a fair point. But what is life without a greater purpose, without something bigger to fight for? In my opinion, that's not a life worth living. Now you may be wondering, but Jake, aren't you trying to change culture with these videos? And to that I will reply, absolutely. I am here as a revolutionary to propagate the ideology of self-reliance, of curiosity, of being a dangerous individual, and if you can't get behind that ideology, then I don't know what to tell you. But if you can get behind those ideas, well then, there's a subscribe button and a notification bell below. All of us have an agenda, don't let anyone tell you otherwise, but at least I admit mine.
Yeah, so there you go. If you ever think of starting a revolution, I'm not saying you should, but now you know. Does anyone have any questions on that video? We're good? Cool. So that is how you spark a revolution, start a revolution.
So you're an idealist that wants to change.
Okay, so accomplishments and consequences to a revolution. So let's say it's done, you revolted, and everything is changed. So the accomplishments are unfortunately limited at best. They often trade one kind of oppressive situation for another. A major outcome of social revolutions is the creation of stronger and more bureaucratic states that are just as repressive, if not more oppressive, than their predecessors. So, for example, we have the Chinese Revolution that started off with a dynasty. So they had emperors for a long time, and then they changed that, and now they are living in communism. So not that great. So why? Successful revolutionary coalitions are generally made up of groups whose interests are otherwise opposing. So once a coalition wins state power, it must then work out a plan for rebuilding the state. At this point, extensive bickering normally begins and a struggle ensues over which part of the coalition will be able to determine the future. And is there a psychological factor? So the leaders of revolutions are intensely committed individuals who are true believers. That means they believe so intensely that their cause that they find is in their cause that they find it extremely difficult to entertain alternative positions. So once the revolutions they have led occurred, they usually feel a strong need to suppress those with opposing views, even if they weren't an important part of a revolutionary coalition. So whoever disagrees with them, they're not on board with that, and it's a no-go. So those are all the accomplishments. There's very little and more consequences. So let's talk about revolutions in today's society. And we're kind of living in arguably one of the biggest revolutions right now. So the Black Lives Matter movement is what it's called. So I want you to look at this video. I'm sure we've all heard some stuff on Black Lives Matter, or have been to a protest, or have seen a protest, or have seen the news. But I want you to watch this video and ask yourself, are we in the midst of a revolution? So Black Lives Matter is a movement. Is that also a revolution? So take everything that we talked about, all the characteristics, all the steps towards creating a revolution, and watch this video and see if there are any similarities there. And we'll talk about that after. Cool. So after watching this, feel free to unmute yourself or chat, put in the chat, but are there characteristics or symbols of revolutions that you saw here? Or if you want to share some personal experience, if you're comfortable in it, about what you feel or experienced within the Black Lives Matter movement? Anyone?
Miss, so like I was gonna say that I still see some videos of people protesting, but like you don't hear it on the news that much anymore, and it's not as widespread as it was before. And like the primary goal to like take justice for George Floyd and Breonna Taylor didn't really happen. So it is a movement, but I don't think it has reached the point to be a revolution yet.
Cool. Yeah, I definitely agree. It does match some of our characteristics that we talked about, but if anyone else wants to share, what will it take to become a revolution?
I think it's because that people are not like, they still hope that they can change within the government. Like they don't want to overthrow the government. They think like they want to ask the Congress and the Senate and laws and bills to do something about it. They haven't reached a point to be violent to want to like completely reform the government.
Yeah, definitely. Anyone else have anything to share? Okay, so that brings us to the end, but we kind of talked about it now, but I want everyone to look at these questions and write something down, use the rest of this class to write something down. And then tomorrow we'll take up the questions. So the first one is there a difference between a revolution, a rebellion, and a movement? Like, is there a difference, if any? And if there is, then explain. And the second one we sort of talked about today. Dina shared a lot. So would Black Lives Matter be considered a revolution or in the process of a revolution? And how can we compare this to revolutions throughout history? And talk about that. Is that good for everyone? Yes. Cool. All right. So use the rest of the time in class to work on these questions. And then when you're done, you can work on anything else. I think you have a CPT or project you have to do. So use the rest of the time for that.